I live in the most sanctioned country in the world. I live in Russia. If you live outside of Russia, you probably have some idea of what life here is supposed to look like. Empty stores, no Western products, no international services, complete isolation from the outside world. Well, today I thought I would show you what it actually looks like. Not on the news, not in the statistics, but in the everyday life of one ordinary person. But before we start, I need to make something very clear. Russian law places restrictions on public statements about certain aspects of the current situation. I don't want to get into trouble, so I'm going to be very careful with my wording. I'm not going to discuss politics, evaluate the decisions of governments, or tell you what I think about them. I'm simply going to show you what my everyday life looks like right now. There is also another important part of the story. Some of the restrictions affecting life in Russia come from outside the country. Others are domestic. So sometimes it feels like we're navigating restrictions coming from both directions. But again, this isn't a political video, it's a snapshot. I want to make one thing very clear from the very beginning. I understand that the inconveniences that I'm going to talk about cannot be compared to the suffering and loss of human life caused by the events behind the current situation. And I'm not making this comparison. I'm not presenting myself as a victim. I'm simply documenting what everyday life in Russia looks like right now, including the small, mundane consequences that practically never make the news. This is what my life in Russia looks like in August 2026. Let's start with the most basic thing: food. If you are imagining empty supermarket shelves, then no. At least not now. At least that's not what I see when I go grocery shopping. There is currently no general shortage of food in my everyday life. What has changed are some of the names on the shelves. Some international companies left Russia, some businesses were sold to Russian owners, and some familiar products were replaced by local alternatives. Probably the easiest example is Coca-Cola. There are now several Russian alternatives. The same thing happened with other familiar soft drinks. There are local alternatives to drinks like Fanta, Sprite, Mirinda, and many others. Sometimes the taste is similar, sometimes not so much, and sometimes you can still find important versions of familiar products, but for a very different price. Then there is McDonald's. It left Russia, and its former restaurants now operate under a Russian brand called Вкусная точка. Literally, it's tasty, period. It means it's tasty, that's it, end of discussion. Russians are very sarcastic about this name now. My grocery shopping hasn't changed much, or hasn't changed at all. I've always bought mostly locally produced food anyway: milk, bread, meat, vegetables, cereals, cheese, things like that. So if you looked inside my fridge several years ago and today, you probably wouldn't see any difference at all. Clothes are similar. Some international fashion brands left the Russian market, but personally this didn't affect me very much either. I didn't buy much from many of those brands in the first place. In my opinion, the quality often didn't really justify the price. I usually bought my clothes online, mostly through Wildberries, Ozon, and La Moda. If you are not familiar with them, they are huge Russian online shopping platforms. Wildberries and Ozon sell almost everything: clothes, electronics, cosmetics, household goods, basically anything you can think of. La Moda is more focused on fashion. Normally, I order several items, have them delivered to a pick point near my home, try them on, keep what I like, and return the rest. Recently, several Wildberries warehouses have burned after attacks, so at the moment, I don't really know whether or how this will affect the way I shop. Maybe I'll simply start visiting shopping malls and see what brands are available there. But right now, at least in my price range, which is fairly modest, I don't see a shortage of clothes. The brands may have changed, the way I buy things may change, but finding clothes isn't a problem for me. This is where things get complicated. Money is where I personally notice the difference much more. My sister lives in Norway. Before 2022, we didn't see each other very often because we already lived in different countries. But at least I could easily send her money. For example, if I wanted her to buy gifts for my nephews for their birthdays or Christmas. Today, I can't simply open my Russian banking app and transfer money to her Norwegian account. My nephews have no gifts from their auntie anymore. And this problem extends far beyond family gifts. My husband is a neurologist. He works with patients with Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes he finds an English language professional course that he wants to take, and then paying for it becomes a challenge. Sometimes we have friends living outside Russia who, for one reason or another, need Russian rubles. They pay for the course for us, and we transfer the equivalent amount to them in rubles using the exchange rate on the day of the transaction. Something similar occasionally happens with my students. I teach languages online, and some of my students live abroad. Sometimes a student has a friend or relative in Russia. That person transfers the lesson fee to me in rubles, and my student pays them back in their currency. It works, but obviously it's complicated and inconvenient, and because of that, it doesn't happen very often. And then there is traveling abroad. Russian bank cards generally can't simply be used internationally the way they could before. So when we traveled to Georgia this summer, we took cash with us. And once we arrived, we exchanged it for Georgian lari. So one of the biggest difference in my everyday life now isn't necessarily can I buy something? It's can I pay for it? These are two very different questions. And money isn't the only thing that makes living far away from my sister more complicated. There's also the actual journey. My sister lives in Norway. Before all of this, a direct flight from Moscow to Oslo took about 2.5 hours. No, we didn't see each other every weekend. But Norway didn't feel impossibly far away. Now, there are no direct flights. Just before filming this video, I checked what it would cost for my family to visit her for 1 week in September. The cheapest round-trip option I found for the four of us was about 200,000 rubles. It's roughly 2,500 US dollars. And the price isn't even the most striking part. The journey would take about 20 hours with 2 connections. 20 hours instead of 2.5. Norway hasn't physically moved any further away, but it certainly feels like it has. And because of the cost and the travel time, visiting my sister isn't something that I can realistically do right now. And then we get to the digital world. This is probably where all these restrictions appear most often in little everyday situations. There are things online that technically exist, I just can't pay for them normally. I can't pay for Netflix subscription with my Russian card. I can't even easily pay for additional storage for my Google account. Sometimes it's something completely insignificant. My children are playing a game. There is an extra pack of skins or some other little feature they want. It costs a few dollars, nothing important. But we can't buy it. And sometimes it's not just entertainment. Some tools I used for work are no longer available either. I used to use Canva. I'm a freelance teacher, so I constantly need to make worksheets, visual materials, and presentations for my students. I also sometimes make presentations for my husband's medical work. Canva is no longer available in Russia, so I had to find an alternative. Now I use the paid version of a Russian service called Supa. It works. But sometimes finding an alternative isn't quite so easy. My 14-year-old son has a Quest 2 VR headset. He loved using it, and more importantly, he wasn't just playing games. He started learning how to create 3D games himself. Unfortunately, restrictions affecting Russian users made using the headset and its ecosystem much more difficult for him, almost impossible. And eventually, he wasn't able to finish the course he had started. At the age of 8, he also became interested in drones. Now it's almost a swear word in Russia. Drones. Just ordinary consumer drones. He was learning how to fly them and how to shoot interesting videos from the air. But drone flights are now prohibited in Russia, so he had to drop that hobby as well. My 9-year-old daughter has a much simpler version of the same problem. She likes cartoons. We have Russian streaming services such as Eevee and Okka. There's plenty of content available, but many foreign movies and cartoons, including ones by Disney or Pixar, aren't available there anymore. I'm not presenting either of these things as a tragedy. Of course, it's not. Life continues, but they are small examples of how much larger circumstances quietly enter ordinary family life. This part affects me directly. I work online from home. My students live in different places, including outside Russia, and for a long time, Telegram was incredibly convenient for my lessons. We could message each other, send files, make calls, everything in one place. Now communication is a little more creative. I still message my students on Telegram. Then, from my phone, I send them a link to a meeting on Yandex Telemost, a Russian video calling service. We have our lesson there, but let's say my student forgets a word. I need to type it for them. So while we're talking on Telemost, I open Telegram on my computer and send the word there. It sounds ridiculous when I speak about it out loud and when I try to explain how it works. But it works for now. WhatsApp has also become unreliable, and I don't use it as my primary way of contacting people. If someone writes to me there, I may respond, but I don't normally initiate conversations there anymore. And then there is another messenger, Max. Messenger Max уловит на парковке. If you live outside of Russia, there is a good chance you've never heard about Max. It's a Russian messaging platform that has been heavily promoted domestically as an alternative to foreign messaging services. I mainly encounter it because of my children. Communication related to their education now happens there. is compulsory. So my digital life looks like something like this. Telegram for one thing, Yandex Telemost for another thing. Sometimes WhatsApp pops up, access to communicate with the teachers and administration, other services for other things. And sometimes access itself becomes an issue. VPNs face restrictions too. There can also be temporary limitations on mobile internet access. Sometimes the challenge isn't even which app should I use, it's which app actually works right now. And somehow you have to build a functioning system out of all that. I think this is the part that's hardest to explain to someone who doesn't live here. None of the things that I've just described individually defines my life. I wake up, I make breakfast, my children go about their day, I work, I teach my students, I go shopping, I cook dinner, we watch something, we go to bed. It's ordinary life. But every now and then I bump into an invisible wall. I can't pay for this website doesn't open, this app doesn't work, this movie isn't available, my card doesn't work abroad, the program I used for work disappears, so I have to find another program, another payment method, another messenger, another workaround, and then I continue with my day. I think that's probably the strangest thing about living under so many restrictions. Extraordinary circumstances eventually become ordinary routines. And I really want to make this clear. I'm not making this video to complain. I'm not telling you that my life is unbearably difficult. Nothing I've shown you in this video is meant to be presented as suffering. This is simply documentation, a snapshot of everyday life. I'm documenting it because this is what everyday life looks like here at this particular moment in history. Maybe 5 years from now, I'll watch this video myself and I'll be surprised about how many things have changed. Or maybe I'll be surprised about how many things haven't. But today, in August 2026, this is normal life. My normal life in the most sanctioned country in the world.